I wanted to do a short recorded session here for you as you near the end of your work on assignment number 1. So bear with me and I'll take you through a few topics here that I think might be helpful to you. One of the things that I want you to emphasize as you work through, especially this first assignment, is your exploratory data analysis. And this is kind of just a simple little Python plot that I did for a small data set for looking at scatter by group. And this was looking at taxes to predict home prices. And the color coding there is really good because it just demonstrates how clearly it is the difference here between homes that have 1 bathroom and those that have 1.5 bathrooms. And, you know, this is not a big deal, but it's just emphasizing the fact that you need to do some searching to look at different ways that you can plot your data to see if it's going to tell you something about the relationship between the variables that you're working with there. So try to be creative. Try to come up with some ways of looking at your data that maybe somebody else hasn't thought of before. Here's the code that goes with that. So if you have not already done this, you know, you can copy this code and apply it somewhere. I want to give you a little bit of history of graphing here and exploratory data analysis. The idea of graphing, the way we look at it today, was probably first started by a guy named René Descartes a long time ago. And if you want to read some of that history, there's an old book out there by Jane Meyer of Men and Numbers, and it was published way back in 1961. It's just kind of interesting to go back and look at how some of this business that we take for granted today originated in the people that came up with it. Another resource that I encourage you to take a look at is some of the books that are written by Edward Tufte. And he did some really creative things there in looking at the visual display of quantitative information. You don't have to go by the book. You can pretty much bring this up on your own just by going on Google and typing in life actor, type in his name. I think almost any of those combinations will bring up sections from his books because they became very popular. And a lot of people reference those. I use the one for life actor in a legal case a few years ago, and they, you know, when you prepare your testimony, you have to share it with the other side before you deliver it. And the other side, when they saw what I was going to testify to, they came and said, "Oh, this is too devastating to our case. Could you use something else besides life actor?" And I said, "Well, that's what the guy did. That's how he described what you were doing in your case that you presented, and I think it's appropriate." And so we got into court, and they presented their argument to the judge, and the judge says, "You know, can you explain what this means?" And I did, and I said, "You know, basically it means that you're distorting data to try to influence other people." And the judge said, "Well, why don't you just say that in court?" And I said, "Okay." And so I did, and I kept saying it over and over in court, and finally the judge told me to stop. But I said, "Okay." So I went on to something else. But in any case, it still was devastating to their case, and those are things that are really good to take a look at because it can be very helpful to you in the future. The other guy that did a lot of work on this is named John Tukey, and his book on exploratory data analysis is very good. You know, a lot of these things you can pick up used copies of them, and they're pretty cheap. If you just take a look on Amazon, you'll probably find copies of any of those books that are still out there, or I don't know, maybe people are hoarding now. But anyway, it's worth taking a look at. Here's another example that I think was very creative, and this was also taken from Tufte. And this guy, Dr. John Snow, back in the early 1800s, there had been a cholera outbreak in London. And at that time, they had no idea what caused cholera. So Dr. Snow started making a plot here. And those little dots on there represent where somebody lived and they died from cholera. And he didn't know what was causing cholera. And so he had this plot, and he had all these dots marked on there. And then he decided to put an X on there where there were pump handles. And the reason a pump handle is important is because in that time, in order for people to get water, they had to go pump it from a well. So if you look real close there, you'll see the X's distributed kind of around that plot. And then there's one X right in the middle, and it's on Broad Street. And when Snow saw that, he thought, that's it. That's what's causing the cholera. And they went out and they took the handle off that pump, and the cholera epidemic ended. So this guy, he was just being creative, and he was probably one of the first people that I would consider to be an epidemiologist. He really had the creative thinking to try to take a look at a disease condition and then match it up with a possible cause, and then begin to see the relationship between those. So I give you this just to encourage your creativity. You guys are going to find ways to look at things that I've never dreamed of before. So here's some thoughts for you as you're going through now and you're doing your write-up and you're kind of finishing up this first assignment. Review that document, Exploratory Data Analysis, that I gave you for assignment 1. Work with some of these other software products. Oh, somebody's trying to call me. I got it on my cell phone. Bear with me. It'll stop in a moment. Work with your skill on software products for doing EDA. These different products for that are Shiny, Excel pivot tables, Python, anything that you're familiar and comfortable with that you think is going to be helpful to you in being able to come up with a solution to some of these things is really going to be important there. Hold on, I'm going to turn that phone off so I can't get any more calls on it. All right. Show me in the assignments that you're using software to explore data, and I'm going to reward you for it. I like to see creativity out there. Here's another thing that's kind of helpful to you, I think. You should be able to take a look at your data and discover when there's been a major error. And this particular example here was one that was turned in by a student in the class you're in, and they were predicting the target wins, and you can see the target wins column there, and then I matched up the predict P_target wins, and then I calculate the error on it. I said, oh my gosh, this is huge, some of the errors in here, and in my software will run this and detect this and show in special instances where your model has made some major errors. And I've given you the code there to do that, and that's part of it. And then there's another portion of it here. I picked up same person that turned in this, and their predictions, some of them were really off, and there were also some negative predictions there for target wins. That is a huge mistake, and I got to warn you, my software that I use to score your code and your models, it'll pick that up, and it will also penalize you, not for having a large error, but it will penalize you greatly for having a prediction that is negative, because you should never have that in there. When you make predictions like that and people spot it, you're going to lose credibility in your work. So make sure that doesn't happen in the reports you turn in there. Okay, I call it applying a sniff test. That means you're going to look at your predictions and see if there's anything obvious. And that code in there for looking for major error is a pretty good way to do it. Something that I do when I first take a look at your work is I sort it. I take a quick sort on your predictions, look at from the low end to the high end, and generally if there's something really bad, I'm going to spot it there in the blink of an eye. And so make sure that you kind of take this into account as you're applying the work you're doing here. If you've not read the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, very good for seeing what happens. Sometimes what you can see in the blink of an eye, it should be, if I can see it in the blink of an eye, you need to be able to spot it before I look. Here's some advice for you. Study the process you're going to be modeling. In some cases, I've had people turn in reports and they would say, well, I didn't do a very good job on this because I didn't know much about the process. That's no excuse. If you don't know about that process, take time to learn. Call up somebody and have somebody that will educate you on that particular process, and then you can take it from there And generally, you people are really smart. You can become an expert in a very short time just by looking at material that's readily available to you. When you start doing that, you're going to try to answer obvious questions. In your first assignment in baseball, what's more important for winning games? Is it defense or offense? Another of your assignments in wine sales, what's the most important? Perfect chemistry, or is it label appeal, or something else? And there's another good book out there by Malcolm Gladwell. It's called Outliers. And he talks about how long it takes to become a world-class expert in something. And you people are on the road to become world-class experts in the work that you're planning to do. So it's a good reference, good material to be reading out there. And it's kind of a fun read, too. So if you don't have Gladwell's books, look for used copies of those, too. Good choices. That's the end of it. So take all this into account as you're writing your reports, and take a little extra time to look at some of those major errors and how you can be more creative in the way that you look at the data and discover things that are in that data. So, all right, guys, have fun with your assignment, and I look forward to seeing your reports.